February 25th, 1945. The black sands of Iwo Jima shook under bombardment, but deep in a hidden bunker, Lieutenant Hartosado felt something different. Something alive. The sound rolling across the battlefield wasn't artillery, or bombs, or even the rattle of machine guns. It was a guttural roar, a hiss that grew into a scream, like some monstrous forge breathing out across the island. He picked up his notebook and scribbled forbidden words. "We are not fighting men anymore. We are fighting fire itself." Above ground, American tanks had appeared with grotesque nozzles jutting from their turrets. They were Shermans, but changed into something new. When they fired, liquid fire spewed out in torrents longer than arrows, hotter than any forge. The impregnable caves of Iwo Jima, carved for months into the volcanic rock, lit up like paper lanterns. Men clawed at the air as oxygen vanished. Screams echoed down stone corridors and then cut off, swallowed by silence, shattering the myth of the fortress. Japanese engineers had turned Iwo Jima into a fortress, 16 miles of tunnels, interlocking bunkers, concrete strongholds buried under volcanic stone. The promise drilled into every soldier was simple: the rock would hold. America's guns and bombs might scorch the surface, but the heart of the island was untouchable. For weeks, that belief gave them courage. They thought they could outlast anything. But when the flamethrower tanks came, that confidence collapsed in seconds. The first wave rolled forward, Shermans fitted with ugly, protruding snouts. The moment the trigger was pulled, the world changed. Fire poured into cave mouths like water, curling along ceilings, racing around corners, devouring oxygen in violent gulps. Chambers that had taken months to build turned into ovens in moments. Men staggered out screaming, uniforms blazing, collapsing in grotesque shapes on the black sand. Others never made it to the entrance, their lungs seared before they could cry out. Artillery could be dodged, bombs might miss, bullets could be endured. But fire? Fire seeped into every crack, every vent, every hiding place. It gave no second chances. For the first time, the defenders felt fear eclipse duty. The first encounter, Sergeant Kiyoshi Nakamura remembered the sound before he ever saw the weapon. A hiss like a giant snake waking, followed by a roar that seemed to swallow the very air. Through the smoke, he thought at first it was just a Sherman. He had trained for this moment. Mines, grenades, satchel charges strapped to desperate men. He had been told the Americans feared close combat, that their machines were clumsy. But then he saw the nozzle glinting in the sun. The tank moved forward, steady, unhurried, as though it knew nothing could stop it. Nakamura's commander shouted for the men to hold fire. Bayonets fixed, rifles aimed, they waited. Then the turret lowered. A jet of fire erupted, leaping across the sand like a living creature. It crashed into the cave mouth and surged inside, curling along ceilings, sucking oxygen from the chamber. Men dropped their rifles, clutching their throats. Some ran out shrieking, uniforms melting into their skin. Others collapsed instantly, lungs scorched. Nakamura froze. His bayonet trembled in his hands. All his life, he had been told courage could conquer steel, that Japan's spirit outweighed America's machinery. But spirit meant nothing against fire. "We were insects before it," he later wrote in a hidden letter. "There is no honor in burning alive. Fanaticism meets fire." For years, Japanese training had centered on the idea that spirit outweighed weapons. Officers promised that courage could overcome tanks, planes, even entire battalions. But on Iwo Jima, when the flamethrower tanks appeared, fanaticism met fire, and spirit alone could not endure. Captain Masao Ishikawa drilled his company endlessly for the glorious moment. They would swarm the tanks, clutching grenades, prove the Emperor's faith justified. But when the first flame burst swept across the black sand, even Ishikawa faltered. The tank's nozzle swung left and right, painting fire across the battlefield. Rocks glowed red. The very air shimmered. Soldiers who had sworn to charge froze in place. Some clawed at the earth. Others buried their faces in the sand. A corporal finally broke, screaming as he hurled himself forward with a satchel charge. But the flames struck him mid-stride. His body collapsed in fire before he could even reach the tank. His sacrifice dissolved in horror, not glory. Ishikawa later scribbled in a note found on his body, "We were told our courage would terrify them. but courage burns like paper. Against fire, spirit is ash before the wind. The weapon that attacked the mind. The flamethrower tanks did more than kill. They attacked the mind. Survivors describe sounds they could never forget. The hiss before ignition, the rushing flame, the shrieking screams. Unlike bombs or shells, the fire lingered. Its glow lit tunnels long after the attack ended. Its roar carried farther than bullets. Even those untouched felt their courage unravel. In one bunker, Sato wrote of hearing a neighboring cave attacked. First the hiss, then pounding fists against stone, coughing, choking, and finally silence. He and his men felt the heat radiating through solid rock. Dust fell from the ceiling as they sat trembling, waiting for their turn. Rumors spread that the Americans commanded demons, that the fire followed men into cracks no weapon should reach. Fear was not just of death, but of the manner of death, suffocating, agonizing, dishonorable. Breaking the myth of American weakness. The deeper shock came not just from the flames, but from the numbers. Many Japanese soldiers believed such tanks were rare, experimental terror weapons. But day after day more appeared. Flamethrower Shermans weren't one-offs. They were mass-produced modifications with the Ronson and Navy Mark I systems, each capable of hurling fire over 100 yards. Behind them came supply crews, fuel trucks, and mechanics who repaired and refueled the tanks within hours. Captured survivors later admitted the most crushing realization. America's war machine could field oceans of fire as casually as rifles. Japan struggled to keep rifles supplied with bullets. America rolled out machines that burned entire tunnels in minutes and returned the next day for more. The fortress turns to a furnace. By March, Iwo Jima's volcanic heart, once considered impregnable, was a maze of death. Whole chambers filled with men became tombs in minutes. In one cavern near Suribachi, more than 80 soldiers huddled together, confident their thick stone shelter would hold. When the flamethrower tank fired into the entrance, oxygen vanished. Within moments, they collapsed where they stood. A corporal managed one final note in his diary. The cave we thought eternal has become our cremation ground. Every tunnel became suspect. Every chamber felt like a furnace waiting to ignite. Officers once sure of their men's discipline now whispered in private that no creed could steady soldiers against the terror of burning alive. Collapse of a creed. By late March, cracks in morale were everywhere. Secret diaries spoke of surrender. An unthinkable word in the Japanese military code. Men begged their officers for death by bullet rather than flame. One lieutenant admitted, "To be pierced by steel is a soldier's death. To burn is to vanish as smoke. Even the gods cannot find such ashes." In the end, the flamethrower tanks destroyed not just fortifications, but illusions. The creed of spirit over steel, courage over machinery, dissolved in fire. The defenders were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to delay the inevitable, praying their deaths would be quick. Legacy of fire. The Shermans that breathed flame became more than weapons. They became symbols of America's inexhaustible power. For Japanese soldiers, they were monsters from hell. For U.S. Marines, they were tools of industrial efficiency, repaired, refueled, and redeployed with mechanical precision. Each assault deepened the despair, proving that America's resources could turn even fire into a routine weapon of war. When Iwo Jima finally fell, survivors carried home memories that burned deeper than any wound. The hiss before ignition, the tunnels glowing red, the screams that echoed until they vanished into silence. Decades later, veterans would say the same words. We were not defeated by men. We were defeated by fire. Iwo Jima became more than a battlefield. It became the place where bravery met fire and burned away.